The presentations are diverse and I hope inclusive. We have 6 presentations this morning, so we'll get right on to it with the first presentation that will be broadcast virtually by Ana Catarina Pinho Gomez on women's representation among peer reviewers of medical journals. Anna?
So good morning for you in Chicago. My name is Kat, and I'd like first of all to thank all my co-authors, without whom this work would have not been possible. And I'm here today to talk to you about women's representation among peer reviewers of medical journals. And this is a very important issue, because although we have known that women are underrepresented as across the publishing system, for instance, they account for about 1 in 3 first authors, 1 in 4 last authors, and about 1 in 5 of editors-in-chief. And we have shown this as well as have other authors in the field. There is much less evidence about peer reviewers, and this is at least partially due to the fact that peer review has been a kind of black box for a very long time. And what this slide tries to illustrate is that you can see there is like what we often call the leaking pipeline. So women's representation tends to decrease as seniority increases. And this is a very big concern, not only for us, but it should be for everyone, really. As we know that women, if they don't have access to the most reputable and the highest ranks in the academic system, they will be less likely to be invited to be not only editors, but also peer reviewers, particularly in high impact journals. So this was the question we're trying to address with our study was, what about women's representation among peer reviewers? Do we see the same gender inequalities? And for that, we also wanted to look at what about editorial boards? Do we see an association between the gender of the editorial boards and the gender of the peer reviewers? Because we know that editors play a paramount role in selecting the peer reviewers they invite. For this, we use the BMJ, the British Medical Journal Publishing Group journals in 2020. And the reason to choosing this publishing group specifically was because the BMJ releases every year towards the end of the year, a list of all the peer reviewers who contributed to that journal. This is not true for all the journals, and so we could only include 47 out of the 74 journals of this publishing group, this family. And what we found is that women accounted for about 1 in 3, about 30% of the peer reviewers, about 30% of the editorial boards, and about 1 in 5 of the editors-in-chief. And it's important to note that there was a big discrepancy or a lot of heterogeneity among the proportion of peer reviewers across all the medical journals. And the purpose of this slide is not for you to read the names of the individual journals, although you can certainly do it in the paper, is to illustrate that there was only one journal with about 50% of peer reviewers, as where about 50% of the peer reviewers were women, and this was the journal Medical Humanities, because for all the others, women accounted for less than 50%. And in some, as you can see, particularly those related to surgery, they accounted for less than 10% of the peer reviewers. And we also observed a dire situation among editors. There were a few journals where you can see that the gender distribution was actually above 50%, and the highest was for BMJ Open Quality. But there were 5 journals with no editor who was a woman. And there were journals with two editors-in-chief, and none of them was a woman, which is really a matter of concern. And then we looked at our hypothesis. Does the percentage of women influence or is correlated with the percentage of women as reviewers? And we found a moderate correlation between these two percentages. And also we noticed that when the editor-in-chief was a woman, the gender distribution among editors was about, there was about parity. So 1 in 2 were women in the editorial boards, and about 1 in 3 of the peer reviewers were women. When the editor-in-chief was a man, the editors were about 1 in 3, and among peer reviewers, women accounted for about 1 in 4. So this suggests that addressing gender inequalities at the top level may be a way of increasing women's representation at the other levels. And the question for us today is, are we going to accept these stark gender imbalances across the publishing system? Or even better, how long are we going to continue to tolerate the situation? Because there is no lack of evidence. The evidence is there. What is lacking is action. And this action needs to be taken not just by authors, by editors, by journals, but also by us as the scientific community in general, in our small teams, in our big teams, in our institutions. We know about the Athena Swan initiative that tried to increase women's representation in academia in the UK, and it has shown successful results, but this needs to be implemented more worldwide. And also considering what are the barriers that are preventing women from climbing the academic ladder and reaching the positions that will then enable them to be accepted and invited as editors and as peer reviewers in the major journals. And this is not just a question of fairness, it's a question of the validity of the science we produce, because it has been shown that research that is produced by a diverse community of scientists, and this applies not only to gender, but also to ethnicity, to socioeconomic background, and not only to a binary definition of gender, importantly. Research that is produced by a diverse team is more likely to be implementable and to be relevant, because it takes into account a wider range of views and perspectives that enriches the outputs of that research. So if we are not going to accept the stark inequalities, are we going to strive for gender equality? And what will it take for us to reach there? And we advocate not only for gender quotas, because although they can play an important role, they are clearly not a silver bullet that will fix the problem of gender inequalities, but for a comprehensive set of measures that starts with algorithms that editors use to select peer reviewers. Those algorithms are based on a pool of authors. And if the pool of authors is biased towards men, then the algorithms will tend to select men and suggest men as peer reviewers. But even there is research showing that even when the pool is well balanced, we subjectively, as editors and as authors, prefer to select men rather than women. And that may be for several reasons. Is it because of reputation? Is it because those people are well known in the field? And is this perpetuating long-standing biases? So the point is, we need to start with ourselves, expand to our small teams, to our big teams, and then advocate for institutions, including journals and publishers, to take action in their ranks to ensure that they have policies that are not either intentionally or unintentionally disadvantaging women. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Anna Katerina. And we have our first question. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Yes, Florence LaCroix, Georgia State University. Excellent article. You've made some extremely valuable points. My concern is, where's your denominator on the females compared to the male scientists? And it's very heterogeneous. I know some fields just super male dominated, and excuse me, my hearing aid phone. Anyway, so, but my question is, for instance, childcare issues. I know personally 40 years ago, when I was trained as a physician scientist, because of childcare issues and others, I dropped out of research for over 8 years and only then came back. And it takes a while, whereas my male colleagues didn't have that issue and they kept going. And I think there are, so that's my question. Denominator, what's your denominator? If 1 in 3 is peer review, and then in that special science, only 1 in 3 are females, then that's that makes your whole conclusion a little bit more, it's not as straightforward as what I'm hearing from you. But then the question, and how to encourage more else to do it, even childcare. Sometimes I know at Harvard, when they have this issue in physicians, they stop the clock for the tenure, because of these issues. So what's your thought on that? Or what do you think?
That's a common question. And whenever we think, I don't think that the question is what is the denominator, because here the denominator is clear. Like, we look at all the editors or all the peer reviewers for a journal, and then look at how many women there are and how many men there are. The question is, where are those peer reviewers coming from? And where are those authors coming from? And that's very difficult to identify, because the authors for a journal, well, anyone can virtually submit a paper to a specific journal. And you can always compare with the gender distribution in medical specialties, but that assumes that it's only medics that are going to submit papers, which is also not true. But there are gender imbalances in medical specialties. We know that women are better represented, for instance, in general practice, or as family physicians, or in pediatrics, than they are in specialties like trauma and orthopedics or other surgical specialties. The issue here is, why are women underrepresented in those professions to start with? And the reasons are likely to be similar. And I agree with you that childcare responsibilities are a very strong deterrent from academic careers for women, because academic careers are often insecure, particularly when you start. And they also require working out of hours and committing weekends and doing unpaid work like peer review or other pastoral work in universities. And women may not have the availability to do that. My question is, why are childcare responsibilities a burden for women rather than men? Why do we still link childcare as a woman's task rather than a family task? Why don't we have in the 21st century a fair share of house care and homemaking and childcare and other caring responsibilities? That's something that me as a feminist cannot understand.
Thank you. We'll go to this microphone. We'll go to this microphone first, and then Michael. Thank you.
Hi, Beth Whipple, Indiana University School of Medicine. So my question was also, I saw it in the chat, I was wondering what tool you use to determine gender. And I also just wanted to ask if you have also looked at how journals, how transparent they are in sharing this type of information about editors-in-chief, editorial boards, peer reviewers on their websites. I know some journals are doing that and some societies are doing that. Are you seeing a shift in that information being made more available?
That's a good question. So for editors, including for all the editorial board and the editor-in-chief, the BMJ has this information published on the website, and all the information we used for this study was information publicly available. We didn't get access to any privileged information. And because it was a manageable number, we checked their affiliations and their name, using their names and their affiliations, and looked at the pronouns they used on their websites. So we knew with a great degree of accuracy, and there was nobody identifying as non-binary. For the peer reviewers, because we had a huge number, then we had over 500 peer reviewers. We couldn't look at them individually. So we had to use a software that is based on the names and attributes gender, which we know is not 100% accurate.
Was
And
that,
as I said,
Yeser or genderize, like which?
yeah,
side
we
of
use the genderize.
Thank you. We'll have Michael now for the online.
Thank you for the presentation. Two people asked that question about the methods by which you assigned reviewers, and Matthew Stanbrook, CMAJ, asks, might your results indicate that women are less likely to accept an invitation to review rather than that journals are less likely to select women as reviewers?
That's one of the key points that we also made in our discussion. And I think it's important as well to bring it here, not least because the reasons that may make women less likely to be invited are probably the reasons that make women less likely to accept. If women have a greater burden of childcare and homemaking responsibilities, they will have less time for tasks that are not part of their routine job, particularly if they are unpaid and fall into hours that they need for other caring and home work. So unless we have a balanced and non-gendered view of the roles women play in society in general, and particularly in the setting of families, then women will always be disadvantaged and unable to invest as much on their career as their male counterparts.
Thank you. We have one last question.
Hi, Leslie Citrome, Editor-in-Chief of Current Medical Research and Opinion and the Psychiatry Editor of Clinical Therapeutics. I'm one of those editors with the ambiguous first name, so you wouldn't be able to know my gender with just looking at my name. But that aside, I have to say that the biggest challenge for journal editors is finding peer reviewers. It really never occurred to me that I may be contributing to the underrepresentation of women peer reviewers, because frankly, I am grateful for every peer reviewer that agrees, regardless of gender. And I reach out, I don't even pay any attention at all to their first name. So it's kind of troubling to me that, this issue exists, but I don't think journal editors are remiss here. And, I once wrote an editorial years ago, where do peer reviewers come from? And I listed, all the possible sources, but today I say wherever I can find them.
Thank you. So let's thank Anna again for her excellent presentation, and have a nice evening, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very
I'm
much.
sure you'll get more questions on the chat.